Okay, so our molar is going to be started off the same way as we did with the central incisor. I'm going to put a little bit of lube on it. And we're going to do the adjacent areas. Take off some of the lube because this one is a little bit thick. We don't want to create space. And we shall start the same way. Now some people like to use margin wax. So the advantage to margin wax is it's a little bit harder. So when you take it off, it will break before it bends. Or there are other waxes that are softer for the margin, and where technicians may not want it to break, they want it to bend. But in my opinion, that is not the right thing, because sometimes you will have openings around the margin if you happen to have forgotten to put an undercut. So margin waxes are generally much harder. This is an example of a margin wax. It's harder, so you would put this at the margin, and then you go ahead and you use your regular gray wax or any other modeling wax. So this is cervical or margin wax, depending on the company. This is made by Yeti. So I'll show you how to use it just so you are familiar with it. So the first thing we do with this is we're going to take our margin wax and flow it around the margins. Now this will actually break before it bends. So if this margin breaks, that means that there is an undercut around the margin. So we need to address that before we finish our wax up. Generally these cervical waxes, they don't shrink as much also. That's another advantage to them. So then we're finished. We'll wait for it to harden a little bit, to cool, before we put other wax on it. So now we'll start. We'll put a layer of our gray wax. So if you've seen my other videos, maybe in morphology, our first step in our wax up is always create a nice coating of wax over the dye. And the way I do that is I just run the wax along and try to add more wax before the wax before I put on solidifies. So you want to do this fairly quickly. Just follow where you put the previous spot and until you go all the way around. Now once we went around, we're going to take our model, we're going to put our dye back, and we're going to start waxing. So now we have our maxillary model. We're going to take a look at this tooth, and if we notice, it's a rhomboidal shaped tooth. So what are we going to do? We're going to take a look at all the different parts of the tooth. Some teeth are more rhomboidal than others, so we have to kind of make it very similar to the other side. So if the other side is not as rhomboidal as our tooth in the book, you know, we're better off trying to mimic the other side. So the way I start is I start with the cusp tips. So if we notice the cusp tips here, they're slightly in the rhombus arrangement, so that's what we're going to do here. Now the cusp tips should align with the cusp tips that are already here. If we take a careful look sideways and from the top, we have to make sure that we align those cusp tips height-wise as well as buccolingually. So height-wise, we're going to align them in a flowing manner according to the curve of Spee. If you don't know what the curve of Spee is, it's a curve that is an imaginary line that connects the cusp tips, and that imaginary line is an upward curve. When you look at the maxillary dentition from the front, if you look at it properly like this, then you're gonna see a curve along these teeth, and we're gonna have to do the same thing here. So that curve has to be lined up with the cusp tips that we're waxing. And now when we look at it from the occlusal standpoint, then it's a curve this way, mesiodistally, because it's like a horseshoe. So these cusp tips have to align with these cusp tips, which have to align with these cusp tips, and they go into a curve. Now we're going to start on the mesiolingual cusp. And if we notice the cusps on the other side, these cusps here, this cusp is very large compared to the cusp on the distal. So that means that this cusp is a little bit placed towards the lingual, and then this cusp here, this is a smaller cusp, the distolingual cusp is placed a little bit more distal. So when you're comparing them to these cusps, so these cusps are a little forward, these cusps are a little back. That's what creates our rhomboidal shape. Now we're going to put the distolingual cusp on, and that will go a little bit more distally. And the lingual cusps are generally a little bit higher on the maxillary than the buccal cusps. On the mandibular it's the opposite. On the mandibular we'll have the lingual cusps lower. Okay, so now we have the cusps. So we have to make sure that they are also aligned with the curve of Spee. This one is a little bit too tall, as we notice when we're comparing it to the distal cusp of our first molar. So the distal cusp of our first molar should line up with the mesiolingual cusp of the second molar. And the distolingual cusp of the second molar should line up with the mesiolingual cusp of the third molar. So everything has to line up. So this one's a little taller, this one matches to that, this one's a little shorter, so this one will match to that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do our contact areas and marginal ridges. So if we remember our lecture about our point angles, we have to make our mesiobuccal point angle of the mesiobuccal cusp right here, and the point angle of the second molar has to match up with the point angle of the first molar. If it doesn't, we're going to end up breaking that rule about the curve of Spee, and the curve of Spee is no longer going to match. So our tooth will be on the wrong line. Okay, so here's our cusp tip. Okay, here's our point angle right here. So now we're going to make a turn here, and we're going to contact this tooth here, and that will allow us to start waxing our mesiomarginal ridge. Remember not to go higher than the adjacent marginal ridge. So then we have our mesial marginal ridge here, about the same height as this tooth, the distal marginal ridge of the first molar. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do the oblique ridge. The oblique ridge runs from the mesiolingual to the distal buccal cusp. And we're going to stop right in the middle, because in the middle is our what? In the middle is our central groove, and in the middle is the end of our mesiolingual lobe. And we all know that developmental grooves divide the lobes. Next thing we can do is we can make our distal marginal ridge by connecting the distal lingual cusp to the contact area here. And we go to about the middle of the tooth there. Try not to go higher than the adjacent tooth. Then we're going to do the distal lingual cusp. This is the distal lingual cusp ridge, which runs into the distal marginal ridge. And as we go along, this tooth will also have a point angle right in the occlusal portion of the distal lingual cusp. And if you notice where we come together from the lingual and the buccal, there's a little groove, and that little groove is called the distal marginal groove. So we want to preserve that. If you happen to do it like this, like a straight groove, then we're going to have to carve the mesial marginal groove in there. And the next thing we're doing right now is the mesial cusp ridge of the distal buccal cusp. And where they meet is going to be your buccal developmental groove. And if we notice, now we're starting to get the shape of the upper second molar. We have our mesiolingual cusp, distal lingual cusp, distal buccal cusp, and mesiobuccal cusp. And if you notice, it is a nice rhombus shape. And the next thing we're going to do after this is the buccal and the lingual contours. So we're going to start with the distal lobe, the distal buccal lobe, I should say. And if we're doing it this way, we're going to minimize our carving, because we're actually placing all the different parts of the tooth onto our canvas, which is our die. So here's our mesiobuccal lobe. where they meet is our buccal developmental groove. If you notice, the two meeting places of the mesiobuccal and the distobuccal lobes create the groove. Now the groove only runs to a maximum of halfway down the tooth, and then it kind of straightens out, and in the gingival is where our height of contour will be. So we'll have to kind of align that with the other teeth. Now sometimes you're gonna get like a little pit on the buccal, but in this case we just kind of have a the meeting of the two lobes, and it creates almost like a depression, but it's a tiny bit more defined than the depressions on the anterior teeth. So here we just have a little bit of a depression, almost forming a groove, but not quite. So this is our buccal. So we're going to take a look at it from the top, and as we can see, it's a tiny bit out more, so we're going to have to eventually carve this down. But let's continue with the lingual. Now remember, this is a second molar, so the second molars generally do not have a cusp of Carabelli, but I did see some very rare occasions where there are some formations of a fifth cusp, but that's very rare. You kind of mix in a little bit of the margin wax into it, it doesn't really hurt it. Margin wax is really just to make the margin a little bit more fragile, so in case there's an undercut or a situation where you waxed over the margin, it will break the margin, which is what we want, because we want to make sure that we do the perfect margin as possible. Okay, so that's our lingual contour. So as we can see now, we have the shape of our tooth, and now we're ready to put in the occlusal anatomy. And because we have such a nice framework done, that should be a snap. Okay, now that we have our outline, our framework, we see that everything is nice and neat. We have our cusps in the right place. We have a nice rhomboidal shape, and we have our cusps pretty much in line. We can put this back on the articulator and make sure that we're not too high on any portions. Okay, so we double check, we hear that the teeth are contacting properly. Now here we may need a little bit more contact right here on the lingual, because the lingual portion of this tooth is going into the central fossa of our lower. It's going to go right in here. It's going to go right in here. So when we close this down, we see that there is a little bit of a contact in this area here, which is good. That's what we want. and we don't have any contact here. But even though we don't have a contact there, I'm not going to build it up, because if you notice, they are the right height when we consider this tooth here and this tooth here, which is the first and the third molars, and it kind of connects everything nicely. So we still have a contact down there, and we have a contact on the marginal ridge. So the next contact we have to achieve is the triangular ridge, and we're going to start building that right now. So what I'll do is I'm going to start by taking it off the articulator so that we have good control. I'm going to start at the central groove area, and that's going to be the wider area of our triangular ridge. And then I'm going to pull up the wax, and the wax itself is going to thin out as we get to the cusp tip. So wider at the bottom, which is at the central groove, and it will thin out as we get to the cusp tip. So it's going to look like a teardrop. But before we build it too high, we want to return it to the articulator and see if it's making contact. If it's not making contact, then we're going to add a little bit. If it is making contact, we're going to stop. Or if it's making too much contact, we're going to have to take some away. If we can see, it does not make contact yet, so we're going to add a little bit and then try again. Okay, so there's our contact. Now it's a little bit too hard. If you notice, it's made a little bit of a hole there. So what we're going to do is we're going to soften it up a little bit, close the hole, and see if we lighten the contact a little bit. Every time you soften the hole, the instrument will take a little bit of wax away. Still a little hard, so let's maybe carve away a little bit of it. And let's not add any wax to it. I'm just going to heat it up a little bit, and then it will take away a little wax. And close it. And there we go. That's all the contact we need. Just a little dimple right there. Now we're going to move on to our distal buccal triangular ridge, and we're going to start right at the bottom and then pull it up to the cusp tip, and we're going to put it back on the articulator and close it. And if we look really carefully, there is a slight touch to it, so I'm going to add just the tiniest bit of wax. Yeah, it's a little too much, so let's take a little bit of it away. Heat it up just so we can be sure that it's making good contact. Okay, that's exactly what we want. Perfect. So now we have a contact here, contact here, contact here, and even a contact here. So the next thing we do is we're going to add our mesiolingual triangular ridge. Again, I'm going to take it off the model, and this triangular ridge is going to be a little bit bigger. And again, we start at the central groove and kind of move it up to the cusp tip there. Just like that. Now if you're not happy with it, we can always take it out. Like this. And we can put it back. I did this just to show you, and also I really like to start wider at the bottom. It always looks more natural when you let the wax do what it wants. Like there's a tendency to the wax to become round when you melt it, and that gives it a very organic looking tooth, because it's working as nature intended it to work. When things grow in the mouth, they also grow rounded. They never grow in geometric fashion. Okay, so now we're going to put that in and see if we can get some contact going there. There's no contact yet. You see? So we're gonna make it a little bit bigger and a little bit taller. Let's see. Let me move it this way so I can see better. A little bit right there. Let's see. A little more. Take a look here. Maybe we can do a little more. You don't want to do too much either, because it might start looking weird. Ooh, it's a bit of a stamp, so we know that we can achieve contact there. So what we'll do is we're going to scrape some of this away. It's very important that we do this step by step, because you can easily lose track of what's too high, what's not too high, or if you do it too high, you're gonna end up with a too much of a contact. Right now we're just about right, so we have one contact here, one contact here, one contact there, one here. Generally that's plenty to stabilize the tooth. So at this point we're going to make sure that our interproximals are good. You see the margins here, how I over-wax the margins. I don't like to do that. So I generally go over the margins like all the time. It's better to be able to control your margins little by little than having to really over-wax something and then taking a whole lot of wax off at one time. When you do that, you may end up breaking the crown itself. Now over here there is a broken margin, if you notice, and it is also open. So what do? That's because when I popped it off by accident, the wax over here, the black wax, flaked away. So now we know we have to be careful in this area. So we're going to remelt that wax, and generally you're going to end up over waxing it over the your margin, over the red line. So you right away go back and very gently with your instrument kind of scrape away the wax. Don't use too much pressure because you're going to end up damaging your margin. You're better off using a nice small instrument and not using a lot of pressure with your hand. And just go all the way around, make sure all your margins are nice and perfect. If you don't have a really good eyesight, grab a microscope and just make sure you take a look at it. Okay, so now we know our margins are good. They fit right back. I'm going to double check, make sure we're not too high. I'm also going to double check our contacts right on the marginal ridge here. Okay, maybe a little. Yeah, we do have good contact there. Right here you can see it. It made contact. Kind of even squashed it a little bit. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this die, we're going to take this restoration, we're going to maybe add a little bit more wax here, a tiny little triangular ridge. That's probably not going to be in contact, so you can just add it arbitrarily. And then what I like to do is I like to puddle in these big areas. Especially that if you notice these teeth are not super detailed. It has a little bit of a secondary anatomy, but not too much. So we can just puddle it in first. Puddling in is nothing more than putting a little bit of wax at a slightly higher temperature, and you kind of make like a groove slash depression there. Just very gently, and not too much wax, just a little bit, kind of smooth it out. It will make a nice little groove there, but not very sharp. We can go back later with the instrument and sharpen it up if we want to. Yeah, just a little bit. right there, maybe a little bit less wax here. It's such a small area. Maybe a little bit more here. And maybe I can go down into the pit a little bit. It's kind of too deep there. So if you notice, it's looking pretty good now. You don't want to make things look too deep, because then it might go very close to the die itself, and we do not want to have a hole in our casting. And just kind of spin it around and take a look at it, see what you want to change, whether you want to add. Maybe I'll make this a little thicker here. And it'll give us a nicer groove. Then all our raggedy areas can be kind of smoothed down a little bit. Now, at this point you may want to go back to your book and take a look at where your grooves are supposed to live. And then we can start kind of sharpening it, and if you want to make it really detailed, you can do it at this point. We already have the general shape where our triangular ridges and grooves are. Okay. Alright, so let's go here. We can add little grooves if you want, but the general developmental grooves I want you to put in, like the mesial and the distal marginal grooves. The buccal grooves should be in there. The oblique groove right here. The oblique groove is basically the groove right next to the oblique ridge, and those are pretty defined usually. You can also maybe do a little bit of refining right on top here. Open it up slightly. This is more like a secondary anatomy. And with this, you want to use an instrument like this, not too sharp, kind of rounded. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to kind of unsharpen some of the areas. As the grooves come up, you are going to have like a widening of the groove, sort of like an opening up of the groove. So your groove is going to be very sharp down here, and it's going to fade out as you come to the tip of the cusp. It kind of gives you a nice effect on the cusp, because it gives you sort of like an uneven curve right here. If you notice against the black background here, it gives you a little bit of an unevenness there as you are opening up these grooves on the incisals, or I should say on the occlusals. So we have plenty of contact points, and this is basically what we're going to have in our occlusion class next semester. But we're going to have a 6 teeth on each arch, so 3 and 3. I'm going to widen this a little bit more here, and maybe bring this a little closer to the distal buccal triangular ridge. We could even kind of wash them together a little bit and make a transverse groove, a transverse ridge here. Some teeth are kind of washed together, so what we'll do is add a little bit here, and we kind of almost connect them but not quite. We can sharpen up the area right between them. And it's pretty much it. The next, all the rest is just like making it nicer and making it your own, however you want to customize it. You can look at the other side of the mouth, which is called the contralateral side, and there we are. We have all three of our restorations waxed. So now you can take your little brush here and kind of take away the little specks. If you want, you can put a little talcum powder on it to give it a little bit less shine. This way you can tell exactly how your anatomy turned out. You can use a stiffer brush if you like. This will take out more of that the little pieces of wax. Okay, so there you go. We got our inlay, we got our molar, and we got our central incisor.